afternoon. My name is Hugh Forrest, and I am the Chief Programming Officer at South by Southwest. Welcome to Friday, March 18th. We are almost to the end of this year's South by Southwest journey, but it's not over till it's over, and we've got a lot of great stuff still to go. Hope you caught the Beck keynote today at 1 o'clock in Ballroom D. We have one final keynote tomorrow. That is Michelle Zahner, the founder and leader of the band Japanese Breakfast. She also wrote the incredible book, memoir Crying in the H Mart from last summer. She'll be doing the keynote again tomorrow, 1 o'clock Ballroom D. She'll also do a brief book signing after that. We also added a very late session to the mix about cannabis evolution. That's tomorrow at 11:30. I think that's in this room, so if you're interested in learning more about where we are with cannabis currently, check that out. Certainly lots of music stuff happening in town now. For your friends who don't have badges or wristbands, remind them that we have the free outdoor stage at Auditorium Shores. That started last night, goes tonight and Saturday night. Tonight is Sammy Hagar, and we don't even have to say what his big hit was, do we? Lots of films happening today and tomorrow. Check those out. If you've got a badge, whether it's a music badge, an interactive badge, or platinum badge, or a film badge, you get into those. I also want to remind everyone here that while we're still in South by Southwest 2022, we turn around pretty quickly for South by Southwest 2023. And what I mean by that is that the South by Southwest panel picker opens in late June. That's where we accept speaking proposals from the community. Anyone can enter an idea, so if you've seen something this week that you like, but you think you can do better, if you've got an idea for something that we need to cover that we haven't covered yet, please get that in the panel picker. That will open late June, go through mid-July. Set a calendar reminder for yourself on that. The panel picker is typically when we introduce new track ideas for the next year. This year we had a transportation track. We added a transportation track. This year we added a climate change track. The third new track we added this year was titled 2050, and this track is about long-term thinking about the future, not thinking about next week, but thinking about 2, 3, 4 decades down the line. Which brings us to today's featured session, titled A Colossal Mission, A Case for De-Extinction. This session is all about the incredibly intriguing new startup, Colossal Biosciences. We've all probably heard a lot about what they're doing, which is trying to bring back dinosaurs. We've all watched that movie from 1993. You know the title there. But let's hear more about what they're doing, what their plans are, how this is going from 3 of the principals involved. We've got 3 dynamic speakers today. Richard Garriott, who is an investor and advisor. Richard, I think, holds the record for speaking the most ever at South by Southwest, although I said that about Bruce Sterling earlier this week, so maybe they're tied. Also, Eriona Hysolli from Colossal Biosciences, and longtime serial Austin and Dallas entrepreneur, Ben Lamm. Please join me in giving a huge South by Southwest welcome to Richard, Ben, and Eriona.
Thanks. Thank you. All right, we have a little teaser here for you first.
The vast mammoth steppe of the Pleistocene era. Woolly mammoths, now long extinct, once roamed these northern landscapes in large herds, playing a critical role in the stability of their ecosystem. In the last half-century, however, these permafrost regions have begun to thaw at an alarming rate due to climate change and the loss of this keystone species. Over the last decade, humanity has made significant advances in understanding DNA and the field of genetics. Breakthrough genetic engineering technologies like CRISPR and others have made it possible to read, edit, and even write genomes. Combining these modern genetic engineering technologies with ancient mammoth DNA recovered from frozen specimens allows for the de-extinction of the woolly mammoth genome. Reintroducing the woolly mammoth to their former homes in the Arctic regions will help to bring balance back to the habitat and slow or even reverse the damage that climate change has done to our planet. Colossal. Restoring the past for a better future.
All right, so first of all, welcome everybody. I think this is going to be truly a mind-blowing session. I'm Richard Garriott, astronaut, head of the Explorers Club, actually down from New York, although a long-term Austinite. And as Hugh said, I was actually speaker at South by Southwest #1. So yeah, I've been through all of these. I'll have to go compare notes with Bruce Sterling on how many times we've both spoken. But, you know, as Hugh also mentioned, everybody's familiar with the movie Jurassic Park. You know, Jurassic Park back in 1993 was right at the beginning of the genetic revolution, when people began to think about reading genomes and considering writing them, and in that case, of course, bringing back, you know, long dead, hundreds of millions of year old super predators, and what could go wrong as that series continues to this day. I think there's a new one coming out this summer. But what Colossal is doing, so you know, I don't know about you all, but I've heard about the concepts of bringing back extinct species for a couple of decades maybe now, even outside of the movies. But you know, you'd hear a little bit and then it would kind of disappear out of the headlines again, and never really saw any progress. But now there's not just progress, this is really happening. The tools and technology now exist. The company Colossal is going to make it happen. But just because it's now possible, that of course brings you to this other questions like, you know, besides being cool, what are the benefits, not just to the extinct animal, but to humanity at large, you know, to the environment at large? And of course, as soon as you're doing that with these incredible, powerful tools, you go like, okay, well, where are the moral and ethical boundaries that you should wrapper all this in? Because those are important questions and important issues to wrestle out before we unleash this upon the world. So today I have a couple of great people with me who Hugh already introduced, both Ben and Eriona, who are two of the principals here at Colossal. So welcome, and let's get into our fun discussion.
Yeah, we are so thrilled to be here, especially with Lord British.
And you know, when I think of last century, you know, the biggest headline of the 20th century, I would argue, was the Apollo moon landings. And if you think about now, here we are in the 21st century, I at least think that when I first started hearing about this, if extinct animals are brought back, that is the first contender, at least in my mind, for what the great headline of the new century might be. And so what I like to do is, you know, let's go back and rewind here about how this came into being. And so, you know, de-extinction is a truly colossal claim. So Eriona, as the scientist in the room, why don't we start with you? Take us through the journey of how this happened, and perhaps pretty early on, tell us who this guy is and what he has to do with it.
Yeah, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
So this is my personal de-extinction story. I had just finished grad school, my grad school program, and I was very interested in a few postdoc opportunities, and I was looking at some labs, and I got very interested in this field called paleogenetics, which is sequencing of ancient genomes. So there were several genomes sequenced, like cave bear, mammoth, Neanderthals, and other ancient hominins with relatively good data sets. So that came to be, that era was ushered because of the faster and cheaper sequencing overall. And at that time, I had heard about George Church, who was a pioneer in sequencing, in synthetic biology, in large-scale bacterial and genome engineering, and overall Genome Project Right. So he had already been talking about how to bring back some of these lost species using this data, especially the ones that are supported by current ecosystems. And so I got very, very interested in that. I contacted him. I joined his lab. I spent 5.5 years there working on 2 main projects, recoding and, of course, the Woolly Mammoth de-extinction. And one of the most exciting things I did while I was there, I traveled with him to Siberia with a group of conservationists, scientists, and filmmakers to the land of the woolly mammoths. And as you can see in this picture here, of course, the expanse of the woolly mammoths was was covered, of course, in Alaska, Canada, Northern Europe, and Siberia itself. So it wasn't just Siberia. But we were very excited to travel there, to travel to Yakutsk, to Chersky, to Pleistocene Park. We covered 4,300 miles. We crossed 14 time zones, and we were thrilled to be there, as you can see in that image with the group. Pleistocene Park is this small enclosed area of about 16 kilometers square. It's fenced in, so the Zimovs, this Russian father-son duo who are testing this geoengineering project of bringing back the lost ecosystem of the mammoth steppe, have brought quite a few animals there, like moose, bison, yaks, reindeer, and so on, to test this hypothesis that potentially reversal to this ecosystem could actually help mitigate climate change. So we were thrilled to be there. We saw quite a few things. One of the things we saw, of course, was these carved out, these caves and tunnels in the permafrost that are used usually to preserve fish. You can see the caves covered in ice crystals. It was quite amazing. Usually the temperature is kept at around minus 12 degrees Celsius year-round.
But it's down underneath that permafrost is where these animals have been frozen and preserved for a long time? How long?
Depends on the age of the mammoths, but thousands of years ago. Yeah. And of course, the mammoth hunters actually go there and actually have to use water cannons to dig them out of the frozen environment. So we traveled there, if you can go back, we traveled there along the Kolyma River, where this exposed Yedoma layer, that's permafrost, that's, you can actually see, even though we traveled in summer, it's still quite frozen. So there is a lot of biomass trapped there. It was quite thrilling, and this is in Duvan Yar. In addition, we were able to collaborate with Russian scientists to see and collect some of the specimen, very, very well-preserved specimen of mammoths, and that's me there, all 5'3" of my frame, next to a woolly mammoth head in a cold room.
And about a 5'3" long tusk, I would argue, too.
Potentially, yes.
And is that actual woolly mammoth, or I guess fur or wool?
Yes, absolutely. You can touch it. It's real fur.
That's awesome. How old is that?
So that particular specimen, I'm not sure, but the next one that we'll be showing, which is one of the best preserved woolly mammoths, that's a Malyakovsky mammoth at the Mammoth Museum. We were thrilled to sample some of it. The trunk is shown there. That's around 28,000 years old.
It's amazing.
So we were able to sample quite a few of these well-preserved specimens. Of course, shown there are some of the woolly mammoth legs from the Yakutsk Academy of Sciences that we were thrilled to drill into. And you know, the tissue is quite fleshy and juicy, which is a very weird thing to say as a vegetarian. And we did have some great vegetarian food in the remote Siberia. And that's me and George and other conservationists looking at samples.
And before we move on from here, you know, at the very top, you mentioned that one of the things that inspired you to get into this field was the fact that people were already publishing pretty good genomes of a number of these Pleistocene era animals. So what was already existing, and what do you need now? What are you going back here acquiring? Yeah, so of course there was an idea that is kind of like an old idea now, that you could potentially find a very well-preserved cell from these specimen and that you can clone a woolly mammoth. And George and I were interested to see how intact the DNA is from these very well-preserved specimen. And of course, we were able to see some well-preserved DNA, but most of it is still degraded. So we believe that the woolly mammoth can be only brought back through genome engineering. Okay, so you're not cloning, you're actually literally reassembling a genome. That's one parallel approach to bringing back the woolly mammoth. And so this work, this trip that happened in 2018 was featured in 60 Minutes, a piece in 60 Minutes in 2019 that was widely viewed, and of course that caught the attention of entrepreneurs like Ben. Yeah, it was perfect cosmic timing, whether it was directly because of just the universe saying that we should do this project, or some mastermind of George Church in media and time. But this actually aired the night that I got back after spending 2 days in the Church lab with George, talking about elephant conservation, talking about de-extinction, talking about, is this something that we should go pursue? I got back, I was super excited, but kind of exhausted from all the knowledge that I got from the trip. And then, of course, this airs. And George gave me absolutely no heads up that this was gonna air.
I think it was my grandmother that called me and said, I think the guy you just talked to is on 60 Minutes. And then it definitely kind of reaffirmed that this is something that we should pursue.
Yeah, and also what's funny there too is I had my own independent but similar call to this project where my wife and I happen to be friends with Elon Musk, and we're investors in basically anything Elon does. And we were actually having a conversation with Elon, and we said, hey, Elon, we're a big fan of yours. We're already investing in everything you do. Who is the next great person we need to go shadow and figure out how we can help make the world a better place? And he said, I've got one name for you, that's George Church. And we immediately jumped on a plane, flew out there, met George, got a lot of the same talk, although he wasn't yet ready to think about spinning any of this stuff out. And so we were sort of in the mode of well, wait and see. Like, when he's ready, we're going to be there. And then a little while, some months later, Ben calls me and says, it's time. I'm planning to do this. Do you want to join? And of course, the answer was immediately yes. So. So that's sort of the background story, the foundation story. So let's fast forward to 2022. So what's happening now?
So we've at South by we actually announced our $60 million Series A, bringing our total capital raise to $75 million. We now have spun up 3 operational labs. These are some folks, including Eriona, in our lab that are doing great work. And now we have over 50 people actually working on doing the actual genetic engineering work. So we're in the process of editing cells, creating iPSCs, induced pluripotent stem cells, and then actually going through and testing the traits that we're starting to bring back and de-extincting of the genes. So a lot in 4 months.
4 months. And so Eriona, I suspect that most of the people here in our audience, since they're here because they understand generally what this idea is. So I think everybody's at least heard of CRISPR, that buzzword. But can you tell us a little bit about, what is CRISPR? What are some of the other key pieces of technology that are needed, and how are you approaching the problem of bringing back the woolly mammoth?
Yeah, George Church is a pioneer in multiplex genome engineering. So a lot of the technologies, at the core of our technologies are genome engineering tools and the toolkit, and with focus on CRISPR-based technologies. As you can see, you probably have all heard of CRISPR. It's essentially a molecular scissors that makes a clean double cut that can either be repaired randomly, or you can introduce a piece of DNA with your desired target. And it's evolved quite a bit. Now it's more precise at the single base pair level through prime or base editors. And we use a collection of these technologies in order to make the changes we need to convert an elephant cell to an Arctic elephant cell. And we have selected a few genes through the analysis of the multiple elephant and woolly mammoth genomes, and we've narrowed down to a few genes that will confer cold adaptation to these cells.
And just to get a sense of the scale of that, so when so the Asian elephant, I think, is the closest living relative. So what is this? How many genes? What is the nature of the scale of difference between an Asian elephant and a woolly mammoth?
Yeah, they're 99.6%
99.6.
Yes.
Okay, so a lot. They're very similar.
It's its closest living relative.
And about how many genes do you need to edit to kind of go backwards in time?
So we are confident that we've selected a handful, around 50 genes that we're going after first, and then expanding that later on.
So Ben, the idea to bring back an extinct species, the technology is available to bring back an extinct species.
The steward of George's vision. I just came along.
But it's still a pretty bold thing to say we're going to go do it, and people might imagine that that's a difficult thing to go fundraise for or bring a team together who believe you can do it. So how did that go?
Well, you were my first call, so I roped you in for quite some time. And the feedback that we got from you and others was really positive. We feel like there's this evolution that's happening in business right now, especially in the technology startup world. I built a bunch of startups over the years. And a lot of companies for a long time were focused on just value creation. And that's awesome for shareholders. That's awesome for your employees and everyone that kind of an investor base. But there's now starting to be this complete change where value creation is actually only kind of like one leg of the stool. Another leg of the stool is impact. Another leg of the stool is inspiration. I know you're a big space investor, and we're both investors in SpaceX. And companies like SpaceX that have the ability to attract incredible talent, create incredible value for its shareholders, change humanity, and then inspire people and little kids that want to grow up and be, scientists and engineers. I think the world's hungry for those types of opportunities. And so working with investors that kind of had that mindset, people like yourself, Thomas Tull, Marshall Sandman and others, Jim Breyer, some of these kind of folks that have long event horizons of what they're looking for capital. They're not just looking for quick returns. They really want to help truly change the world and create impact as well as inspire the next generation. So we were pretty curated with our list, and we actually went out to raise 5 to 8 million. Now we've raised 75 million. So I think it's a testament to kind of the model of kind of combining value creation, impact, and inspiration.
And so let's dig down a little bit about why this is important, one of those legs of the stool. Because I think everybody understands that it's cool to bring back an extinct species, and maybe a little scary for some people, but in fact it is important. And so let's talk about why is de-extinction important? Why is it important, and why are the tools important?
I think it's definitely scary if you frame it in the 1993 Jurassic Park angle. It doesn't help that Thomas Tull is one of our largest investors, who was the producer of Jurassic World, but he's actually a very large conservationist, and he does a lot in AI. So that he is not just he did not create Jurassic World. But one of the things
AI, there's no worries about AI either, of course. No one's afraid of that in the future.
That's the next panel. I think the next panel in this room is ethics of AI. It's like de-extinction to AI. We'll just cram all the weird stuff in one thing, all the utopian. But de-extinction, we're in this 6th mass extinction event, and this one's man-made. Some of the species here on the screen, people don't realize even exist, but most of them on the screen probably won't exist for much longer. Between now and 2050, we as humanity are going to lose up to 50% of all biodiversity on planet Earth if we do nothing. And that has a massive trickle-down effect to losing entire ecosystems starting to degrade and whatnot. And people are starting to talk a lot about climate change, which is great, but not enough people are talking about loss of biodiversity, and it's happening at an alarming rate. Probably the cutest aquatic mammal in the world, the vaquita, there in the middle, there's only 20 of them left in the world. They are functionally extinct. And then we're going to talk a little bit about rhinos here in a second. And so the Sumatran rhino, there's less than 60 left in the wild, which is that bottom picture. On the previous slide. Yep. And so the Sumatran rhino were actually the closest living relative to the woolly rhino that also went extinct, partially by man's hand as well, just kind of precursors. And one of the things that, to kind of show how these technologies in genetic rescue can be really helpful for species preservation and not just de-extinction, I think we should look at the case with the Sumatran rhino, the northern white rhinos. The northern white rhinos, this is Sudan. Unfortunately, he's passed away. He was the last of his kind in terms of a male northern white rhino. If we go to the next slide, the remaining 2 northern white rhino, the only 2 left on the planet that we know of, are these 2. And so, Najin and Fatu, Najin on the left screen and Fatu on the right, are 2 female northern white rhinos. Last October or November, they Biorescue and the incredible rhino team that's been working with them, that's been employing genetic rescue technologies, decided that it's too late and she's too old to put down to sleep, use chemicals, and then go through this pretty invasive process for egg retrieval. I mean, it's a very invasive, hard process on the animal. And when you only have 2 left, it's a massive risk. And so genetic rescue, even for this species, may be lost at this point. And so that leaves, if you go back one more slide, sorry. Yep. I just get really passionate about rhinos. That leaves Fatu on the right, who, these aren't these weird mythical creatures that you just hear about or see. I mean, Fatu's sitting in a field like my dog sits in our backyard, right? And like, these are incredible creatures that deserve our support. They deserve our saving. And so the way to do that really is kind of through genetic rescue and genetic technologies. And some of the technologies that we're developing, next-gen sequencing, gametogenesis, artificial wombs and multiplex editing will really allow us to pull together not just a de-extinction toolkit, but a toolkit that can be used for species preservation. And so I'm not the scientist on stage. I just listen to a lot of science every day. But gametogenesis is a technology and technique that we're using in our labs, both with elephants and with rhino cells, where we're actually reprogramming stem cells into their induced pluripotent stem cell state so that we can then create different tissues. One of those tissues is actually gametes, or the precursor to embryos. It's the egg cell. So imagine not having to put, Najin to sleep, fill her full of chemicals, and then painfully extract egg cells just so that we can try to save the species. Imagine being able to leverage this stem cell reprogramming technology from just a tissue sample and create enough embryos that then we can grow them ex utero in artificial wombs. The only way to save certain species are with genetic rescue technologies based on where they are.
Of course, preserving things that are about to be extinct or becoming extinct, bringing back things that are recently extinct, especially if they're keystone species, we get that that's really important. But I know George at least has talked a lot about how beyond from a animal life standpoint, this is also extremely important for climate change. And at least when I first heard about that, that was not self-evident to me. And so I had to have somebody sort of walk me through, why does this help with climate change? So Eriona, can you kind of help us with that one?
Yeah, I view Colossal as a company with short-term and long-term goals. On the short-term, of course, we're interested. We are a conservation company with a twist. We're interested in the thoughtful, disruptive conservation. We want to learn from evolution to confer these cold adapted traits to a megafauna that is in severe need of them, and we have endangered species, of course, with elephants, but also long-term on Arctic rewilding. And as you can see from the image there are 1 million square miles in Siberia. There is a estimation between 180 to potentially 1,400 gigatons of carbon trapped because of prehistoric biomass, organic biomass, and that with the thawing of the permafrost can be released in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide or methane, which is about 30 times more potent as a greenhouse gas. So we would like to actually change the ecosystem a little bit, go from this poor Arctic Tundra ecosystem with slow-growing shrubs and coniferous trees to something that is sort of like faster grassland ecosystem that is faster nitrogen cycling and, of course, can serve as a sponge to keep this carbon sequestered. And so our company is very interested in these ideas, especially as being tested in Pleistocene Park, where you can introduce grassland ecosystem into the tundra, as well as get rid of these deciduous trees. And some of it is, of course, being tested in Pleistocene Park.
And we are not against trees. We're just against these small, inefficient coniferous trees in the Arctic. And but the scary thing about this map is that there's more carbon and methane stored in the Arctic than anywhere else, and so on the planet. So if the permafrost melts, we've got a pretty big problem. And our partners, Nikita and Sergei Zimov in northern Siberia, who've been working on this for 20 years, have actually shown, 4 to up to 10 degrees. Is that right?
Yes.
Ish? Okay.
With the animals that they brought into the park, as they trample the snow, it helps with penetrating of the cold temperatures at the surface level, and that can slow down the thawing of the permafrost.
Yeah, and so to me, at least, it was, until I began to read up on this, it was obvious to me that yes, like you mentioned, the rapid turnover of the grass, as well as the albedo change, when you get rid of the darker, slower growing coniferous trees. So anyway, it's a fascinating thing. So we've now talked about the woolly mammoth, but how about the Asian elephant themselves? So, elephants have existed all over the planet once upon a time. We just have them left in a couple of pockets. How is this going to benefit, elephants that currently exist?
Yeah, elephants are endangered, and Asian elephants more so endangered. And not enough people are, I think, talking about elephant conservation and what's needed to protect elephants. Poaching is terrible, and it's like where 99% of people put all of the focus and all of the time. But it's actually not the number one or number two killer of elephants. One of the biggest killers, and we didn't want to put a slide up about this just because we felt that showing baby elephants that or at this stage of their life was not probably the best visual. So I recommend if you Google it, beware. But EEHV, which is a herpes vaccine, or a herpes virus, thank you. We hope to make the vaccine. A herpes virus that actually kills 25% of Asian elephants at the time of weaning. It's incredibly deadly. It's now spreading in zoos. It's a massive issue. We hope to, we're working both in our lab and with people like Virginia Pearson and people that have dedicated parts of their lives to this to help build both therapeutics and vaccines like the mRNA vaccine that we've seen recently for elephants. And so that's something that just didn't exist because there just wasn't the funding on it. You had a couple people that were very passionate about it. We have the tools and technologies to do it, but there wasn't, 4 labs with the resources that we now have to go after it. The second biggest killer of elephants that people don't talk about is actually due to human-elephant conflict, not just poaching. So elephants and humans now live in very close proximity, and most of those proximities have massive human density. And so this is a picture under which several humans died. This elephant also died just due to the fact that these are on the, some of these cities are bleeding into the forest. And so loss of habitat is causing more and more issues between human and species. And so our vision is through what we're calling internally species extension. How can we actually create genetically modified cold-tolerant elephants that have the benefit that Eriona talked about with climate change, reintroduce them into the Arctic in a way that can remove them from these high, dense populations of humans, and also have the benefit of combating climate change. And this next photo, this is not a big reveal. This is not a mammoth. This is a Asian elephant in northern Canada through one of our partners. And so these animals, and not just elephants, but a lot of animals actually have a ton of adaptability to different climates. Now, Asian elephants can't live in -20 and -40. They can't live out in the tundra in day and night, 24/7. But, and so these actually go in a barn at night. But in northern Canada, they're actually breaking through the ice and swimming in the frozen lakes in the winter. They're making snowballs. And so they are the closest phylogenetic living relatives to the woolly mammoth. So being in the Arctic and in subarctic areas is in their DNA. It's just we're working to express it.
And so, we've talked now about sort of the stack of technologies from CRISPR to artificial wombs that is helpful to bring back these extinct species. But let's now go to some of the spin-off technologies that go beyond de-extinction. Tell us a little bit about what some of the other technologies you're either using or building, and what some of those other applications could be.
Yeah, and probably we can move to the next slides, and potentially the next as well. Yeah, so Colossal is building the first de-extinction pipeline, going from genomes to birth of the extinct animal as well as herd populations in the near future. And all the technologies that we built and that we're optimizing, and this is in partnership, of course, with George's lab as well, they can have important applications in human health and disease and other species as well. And among them, multiplex genome engineering, for example, in addition to it being used already by another Church Lab spinoff on xenotransplantation. So genome engineering pig cells for the purpose of transplanting their organs into humans. It can also be used to create drought-resistant or pest-resistant plants, overall better crops and better food. In addition to that, our gametogenesis work, which is producing these germ cells from artificially induced pluripotent cells, can actually be used, and therefore removing this invasive collection of biological material from endangered species can be quite helpful. On top of that, we also are working very hard on artificial wombs. So actually gestating the animal from the zygote to birth in this artificial setting exogenously, so that we can remove completely the burden of surrogacy, especially with these animals that have complex reproductive systems, long gestation times, and they're of course highly endangered. So all of these aims that Colossal has, all of the technologies that we're building can actually help other species as well as humans in the future.
Yeah, and I'm guessing everybody in the audience can easily see how on the positive side, for example, having an artificial womb to be available for a premature baby clearly is a huge positive. Being able to, correct, life-threatening diseases early, pre-birth or soon after, or whatever the stage might be as is appropriate, clearly huge positives. But of course, we're also unleashing a tool set that, like so many scientific breakthroughs, can be used for good or evil, or at least or unknown, or at least could escape the lab and cause all kinds of trouble. And so moral and ethical questions have to be coming up very early. I'm confident I know for a fact you've actually received plenty of criticism, even with the initial concept of bring back a woolly mammoth. So what's your approach to managing that?
And before that, Ben, I can mention that genome engineering can also be used potentially for making radiation-resistant humans and other organisms for extraplanetary life, and that's to tee up Ben now with the ethical discussion.
In case they weren't scared, we can do weird stuff to humans. Thanks, Eriona, and Richard, who's been to space. So ethics is incredibly important, and we believe in radical transparency. We want to hear the voices of all. We were very selective and very quiet with who we went to in the fundraising capital side of the business that we talked about earlier. And we could have just stood up these labs and done everything in private. We didn't want to do that. I think that naysayers, criticisms is actually incredibly important. We've gotten a lot of support since we launched, and that's been amazing. And we love the support. We're very grateful for people pinging us, asking us for T-shirts and how they can support us and engaging us on social and emailing us. We love that. We love all the partners and the labs and the zoos, but at the same time, we learn a lot more from the naysayers. You don't learn as much. I mean, you get collaborations and other things out of it, so it's positive when you get positive feedback. But the naysayers and the criticisms is actually pretty key to our success, because we believe in radical transparency. We want to engage with indigenous people groups in the areas that we want to rewild. We want to work with top conservationists. We want to work with top government officials and the public at large. We want to get, and then obviously the scientific community. So for us, it's really important about engaging the naysayers and taking that criticism, because that's the only way we learn. And so we have a picture of Alta Charo. She's on our scientific advisory board, the scariest call I had since starting this company. And she's also our lead bioethicist. And we chose Alta, and we approached Alta, and we've been working with her for a year or so, even before launch, because Alta 3 years ago debated George Church about why you should not use these technologies for de-extinction. And so for us, it was important to not just go find a bioethicist, so we had a bioethicist. We wanted to find this bioethicist who's the top of her field, incredibly well respected, and has been negative on the topic, because we wanted to get the feedback of what can we do better? How can we be more transparent? Where should we draw the lines ethically? What should we build? What should we not build? And so she's been incredibly helpful at helping us shape kind of what our own internal ethical framework is, not just as it relates to de-extinction, but as a company. And so one of the things that you'll see from us is we have a pretty diverse group of people that are involved with the company, both internally and externally, and they have very diverse voices, and some of them are negative. And we're not just okay with that. We actually love that, because it helps shape us in the way that we can hopefully do things positive, because we're not going to do everything right, but with this kind of mentality, we think we can do things as best we can.
Yeah, so this is phenomenal. So, I happen to be a child literally of the Apollo era.
Your dad was an astronaut.
The 20th century's biggest headline. One of the other benefits, I think, of the Apollo era was that it inspired a generation. It was the thing that inspired the STEM revolution that allowed our country to lead the world, and even the world now, has gone through this technological boom that I think in many ways can see its nascent beginning in the inspiration of Apollo. Now that we're here in the 21st century, genetic engineering, I think, is like I'd mentioned about, it's not only the biggest headline, or at least the first great case for the 21st century headline, but along with that comes, again, another round of inspiration to the youth of the world to get into STEM and science and biology, in this case, to help that go forward. So let's bring it up to literally today. So you've The company's existed for 4 months, is that what you said?
It's like 5.
A whopping 5 months. So in 5 months, it went from being an idea that a lot of people would describe as a flight of fancy to bring the staff together, 3 offices running, people are doing work, people are doing genetic engineering in a lab. Are we about to open a curtain and reveal the woolly mammoth?
Yes, today, first at South by. This is where we decided to.
Where are we right now?
Yeah, so Eriona, I think, did a great job explaining a little bit about the science and the tools that we're using. Richard, in talking a little bit about the history, talked about that we actually have the genes, we actually have the tissue samples, we've been going through the process, and we've started to make edits. So for the first time, we do have something kind of we think is pretty exciting to share. If you want to switch to the next slide. So for the first time ever, outside of our lab and outside of the company and outside of our board, we're sharing this with the world and the South by community. I'm incredibly excited to share this with you. It may not look like much, but great things come from small beginnings. And so Eriona, do you want to tell this audience a little bit about what they're seeing and like why we are so excited about it?
Yeah, I think I want to show here the image of what I think encapsulates the colossal vision at a smaller scale, which is these are Asian elephant mesenchymal stem cells that are expressing 5 mammoth genes that confer cold adaptation. And the green marker is just to show that these genes are being expressed. So we think that this is the beginning of cold adapted cells on the way to cold adapted elephants.
Yeah.
And so I personally just find that profound, that literally this is no longer fantasy. This is literally 5 of the 50-ish genes that need to be brought back. And here they are in living tissue right now in only a few short months.
Yeah,
so
in our labs.
Personally, I'm very excited. I think this is, for a company that's only 5 months old, this is already pretty astounding progress. With that, I would like to first say thank you to Ben and Eriona. Say thank you to all of you for coming and hearing about this colossal vision. And we have about 18 minutes left, and so we will now open it up to questions. I think, but instead of raising hands, by the way this now works is with on your South by Southwest Go app. There is an engage that's called Slido. If you haven't done that, here I'm going to open up my thing here too. So of course I have to get past the commercial. But here we go. So if you find your Slido app, there we go. So you can put your questions in there, and we have one of the Colossal folks over here helping to sort that up here for us. So
do you want to read the first one?
Yeah, we'll jump right in, right at the top. Why bring back extinct species now?
Multi-parter.
If we've destroyed their habitats, where will they live, and should we spending our funding on solving their habitat problems instead?
This is a great question. So a couple answers to this, because there's a couple great questions there. So first, on the funding side, yes, all of you should donate to these incredible causes. You guys should volunteer for these incredible causes. We work with a lot of great folks like Rewild and Wild Aid and Save the Elephants and others, and you should absolutely do that. When we raised our funding from people that write checks to software. So instead of an app with an ad in it, we're now working on a disruptive conservation company. So we were very focused on not going to places that we could raise capital from that would have the potential to take away capital from conservation. We wanted to raise capital from technology people that were writing checks into the next generation of XYZ software that probably does something very similar to the last version of the software with a better interface. And so we are really focused heavily on being thoughtful about where our capital comes from. And so for us, we work very closely with a lot of great rewilding partners and that have boots on the ground that have been working with folks for 10 plus years to ensure that when there's orphan elephants, how do you rewild them? When there's threatened habitat, how do you protect that? And so this is not a colossal problem. This is a world problem. And so it's not just going to be us as the scientists and the geneticists that bring back these keystone species. We actually have to work with boots on the ground of conservationists that know the best practices for rewilding. But we're starting now. We're already working with the Species Survival Commission, which is like the UN of species. We're working with indigenous groups in the areas that we're looking to talk to and actually rewild. So we're trying to be very thoughtful in that approach, and that kind of goes back to radical transparency.
Yeah, and can I throw in a thought there too,
Yeah.
which is the woolly mammoth was very purposefully selected. I mean, this technology will actually work on a variety of Pleistocene era creatures, including, the saber-toothed tiger potentially, would be, what could go wrong? Bring back a predator.
What could go wrong?
And, but if you think about this, and that was really important, you've mentioned now a couple times, working with the indigenous people who live in these regions, because, on the good side, that's not in a city that's highly populated, so they're less likely to rampage through town. When you talk about the habitat, they're going to purposefully change their habitat.
Yeah.
But that's thought of as a good thing, that they are the mechanism of the habitat change. But of course, that change comes with consequences that need to be measured carefully, and one of those, like you mentioned, is somebody owns that property, somebody lives on that property, somebody cares about how it is right now, and so those people need to be all in support of this. Everywhere from the local community, the scientists, all the way down, have to be in favor of this.
And one of the other questions is, what is the timeline for getting our first mammoth calves back? And right now we're focusing on kind of a 4 to 6 year time frame. It's about 22 months for gestation of an elephant. We're not changing that, and so we have time, right? So we're not waiting till year 5 to go have these conversations. We're having conversations now. We're trying to bring in the public now. We're talking to the owners of various land now. And like the mammoth, another question that often comes up is, what other species would you entertain? Hugh painted a slightly different picture when he came out. But we'd only focus on species where man had a hand in its the species extinction, and where man could actually be, or where the reintroduction of the species could be helpful to the environment and have a positive ecological environment.
But another one popping up here, one of my favorites, is, do these technologies, or things close to these technologies, would they even allow the bringing back of, let's say, a Tyrannosaurus Rex?
So you can't, George and I get asked this question every day, and some media, some variant of this question comes up. George tried to convince, I think, the New York Times that it's okay, we're building fluffy velociraptors. I think that was his favorite quote. And I was like, George, after the call, I was like, why would you say that? So we're in a phase of genetic engineering that we've internally called genetic reconciliation. So we're combining genes between an Asian elephant and a woolly mammoth that's its closest phylogenetic relative, and expressing those genes to get the phenotypes and traits that we're looking to for cold tolerance. So for us, that's you have to have tissue samples, and the best way to get tissue samples that's thousands of years old is in frozen tissue. There was 3 to 10,000 years ago is a very different leap than 65 million years old. 65 million years ago. And so I do not believe it's possible to bring back a dinosaur, because you do not have any of the DNA.
Yeah, and well, let me just dig down a little, just to be very specific. So, Jurassic Park started with the blood in a mosquito in amber.
Doesn't work.
And so I presume there are mosquitoes in amber. I think I've got some on my shelf at home.
Yeah, but they're
that I bought right after Jurassic Park.
Yeah, amber is not the best preserver of DNA.
Okay, and so what would you, has anybody ever tried? I mean, what do you get out of there? Nothing?
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very highly degraded DNA and
so
very
nothing,
contaminated
nothing
DNA. And I think there's a reason why our keystone species is woolly mammoth. In addition to the climate change mitigation, potentially, I mean, we're viewing this as a species extension. The ecosystem in Siberia is still largely unchanged. It's still a very cold climate, something that, and the last of the woolly mammoths roamed around 5,000 years ago. So it's quite a new, so it hasn't completely disappeared as a habitat, unlike some other species that we talk about or people ask us a lot about. So I think for a variety of reasons, and for me personally, for the species extension, that is for saving the elephants, is one of the main reasons why we're doing that. So, and we're very excited about it.
Take number 2, I think, on there is an interesting one.
Yeah, I thought too. So how are you planning to ensure genetic diversity in potential future mammoth populations? Oh, keeps moving. When the mammoth DNA you have comes from a small small set of samples.
Yeah, so one other cool thing about the woolly mammoths is that there are a ton of specimens trapped in the permafrost, right? So we actually can not only sample multiple of them, but also across time, so we can understand their evolution. And on top of that, with the genome engineering tools that we use, you can actually introduce genomic diversity. In addition, Colossal is very, very interested in preserving the genetic diversity of the elephant populations before they disappear as well. And so we can learn from what consists of thriving, successful a herd of elephants even before we actually get to the woolly mammoth. So understanding more of what is the right biodiversity in these extant populations will actually help us dictate what could be a thriving pool of genetic diversity in the Arctic elephants in the future.
You know, a question I see on here just makes me chuckle, being a person who lives on Lake Austin, where you know, like Australia, I think, is the prime example of changes being made to ecosystems that then go awry.
Yep.
But so is Lake Austin. You know, we somehow introduced duckweed that they used to lower the lake level to kill off, and then they introduced the crappy fish to come eat it. Then those they were supposed to be, I think, sterile, and then it turns out they weren't, you know, similar to Jurassic Park. Now we've introduced the zebra mussels that are clogging it all up. So all these things, you know, it's this big experiment we're running here. And so the question is, like, you know, how is it you think you can possibly understand this complexity of a giant ecosystem like this and not be introducing something that has this risk of Lake Austin or Australia, you know, running amok in some other negative way?
So I think that you have to be pretty thoughtful and pretty measured with the intended and unintended consequences of when you attempt what is rewilding, regardless of whether it's mammoths or wolves in the Yellowstone, right? Like, one of the most successful rewilding experiments in the last 100 years is the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone, which actually has gone off incredibly well. It's completely reshaped the parks. We didn't do it, but there's great videos online. You should really see how much it changed everything from the shape of rivers to brought back songbirds. It's incredible what reintroduction of a keystone species, in this case, a predator, really did. So you have to be really thoughtful about the intended and unintended consequences. I believe that when you are rolling out an intended consequence with an animal that's thousands of pounds, you can be thoughtful and you can track it and you can measure it and you can potentially roll back issues. With genetically modified mosquitoes or throwing random zebra mussels where your water gets all weird, the water gets weird here a couple times a year, and you know, that to me is actually scarier than putting mammoths back in the Arctic, because we're starting with low populations. We're working off of 20 years of published research. This isn't a theory. There's published papers that have been peer reviewed that talk about Arctic rewilding and showing that the reintroduction of megafauna back into the Arctic lowers ground temperature, and it allows for the albedo effect from the Arctic grasslands to work. And so the Arctic grassland, the Arctic and tundra right now is seen as classified as a degraded ecosystem, and it doesn't need much to get back to where it was. And so I think that we can be pretty thoughtful with the reintroduction of, you know, 1,000-pound animals versus small mussels or genetically modified mosquitoes running amok in the wild. Like, I read some study how they released some genetically modified mosquitoes, and that scared me more than what we're working on.
And Eriona, I know we covered it midway through our discussion, but a question that has come up a few times here from the audience also is to help people better understand why megafauna helps prevent the release of the current stored CO2 and methane that's currently in that permafrost. How do woolly mammoths help?
Yeah, so it's been estimated that the mammoth steppe ecosystem was very, very biodiverse and very rich. And this vegetation was supported by this megafauna and a lot of animals. I think it's essentially, I think it was calculated by the Zimovs to be about a ton of biomass into 1 square kilometers. And so that means that you need to actually megafauna to trample and to actually provide nutrition as well for these grasslands that support this faster cycling ecosystem. And therefore, getting rid of the deciduous coniferous trees that can actually creep up. So in order to be able to do that, you need to introduce large megafauna that can do this. I mean, obviously, you can use a tractor that's been tested in places and park as well, but you'd want something that is a little bit greener.
And scalable.
And scalable.
Two tractors fall in love. We're not going to have more tractors.
So it sounds like though it's on both sides. So the nice thing about the megafauna is it's both helping with recapture of CO2 and increasing the albedo of the ground that helps cool it immediately.
And lowering core
But also
gravity.
the stuff that's currently under the soil is also retained better because of the lower albedo, because of the lower temperature, and the trampling effect of the snow actually helps the permafrost get formed in the first place. Is that accurate? Okay.
No.
How about other species? So there's probably a lot of things trapped in the ice. I know of a couple, like one of my favorites is the woolly rhinoceros. I presume you found some.
One of my favorite.
But because at least it's still an herbivore, but it looks scarier, which is kind of why I like it. But no, tell us what else.
I'm trying to scare anyone.
I know you're trying to stay away from the scary stuff, but
Yeah, cave bears, cave lions, horses, woolly rhinos. Yeah, there have been a
Giant
variety.
sloths.
oh, giant sloths. That sounds fun.
yeah.
Something like I had to run away from.
Yeah.
Because it probably moves. Does it move
Slowly.
slow?
I think it moves faster than the tree sloths.
Okay.
So.
And the reason for the woolly mammoth, of course, as we covered, is that they are the only ones that seem to have a winning chance against trees.
A winning chance against trees.
Coniferous trees.
Small, coniferous, inefficient trees in the Arctic. But just to clarify. But yeah, there's lots of species, or a good handful of species that we have DNA from. There's even some, people ask us a lot about the dodo. Beth Shapiro, who's one of our scientific advisory board members and our lead paleogeneticist, I think she just announced a day or two ago about that that her and her team have completed the first ever fully assembled genome for the dodo. So there are other species that are candidates for de-extinction, but once again, they have to, for us at least, they have to serve some type of ecological impact. I don't know if everything that's in the Pleistocene era will serve that ecological impact. I do think that woolly rhinos would, right? Because it won't have the same effect on trees, but it has a similar effect on ground penetration. So I think rhinos could be a really good candidate as well.
And so, at least in the flights of fantasy, I know one of the reasons you're picking a woolly rhino is also it has a living relative that you can help with gestation and for lining up the DNA against and things of that nature. But in theory, this eventually could lead to where you could do more complex editing that is less related to its recent or existing ancestor. We make a unicorn or something someday in the farther future. Where are those red lines where you go, okay, at least as we understand the world today and what's possible to do without danger, with a measured amount of impact, where is too far? And where is that line?
It's a great question. So we're only focused right now on species that have an ecological impact. Even with this funding, this is a massive task, right? It's not easy to do this, right? You've got to have the smartest people in the world. You've got to have the greatest investors in the world. You've got to have the right kind of mix to do it. And so de-extinction and a lot of these labs that have been working on de-extinction just haven't been well funded over the years. And so we are really just focusing on species, and where we draw the line is where we can actually have an ecological impact for bringing it back. We're only working publicly on the woolly mammoth. There's some other species that we're doing some ecological impact studies on, but we're not afraid of doing a carnivore, for example, if it made sense for ecological reasons, right? So we're not just looking for herbivores. We did start with an herbivore. We thought that was the right call. But we aren't afraid of leveraging a carnivore if it made the right sense for an ecological impact, right?
Yeah, we only have just over a minute left. So let me take maybe this last question, but I like this one too, which is bringing them back. How do you make the decision as to where you might bring these back, and in what circumstance would they bring them back? Does this mean we're going to now have woolly mammoth 2.0 hunting ranges popping up?
Yeah, so hunting apparently has done a lot for conservation over the years. Something that I didn't learn about because I'm not a hunter, until I got into the world that we're in conservation. But I think that we're going to work really, really closely with government. So we're already working with the Australian government. We're already working with the government of South Africa on some of them on de-extinction, some of them on species preservation of some of their species that are in the process of going extinct or are recently extinct. So we want a very collaborative relationship, but we also want to create wonder. Going back to that slide about impact, inspiration, value creation, I don't think it's inspiring to create something and then shoot it. So,
all right. Well, I think that
inspiring.
is where we had to stop. Thanks to both of you, and thanks to all of you. We'll be hanging out a little while after if you want to chat some more.